Very interesting paper, which people can go and read at their leisure by some colleagues of mine from UEA. They looked through a set of evidence that they'd collected over a number of years and identified a number of barriers that people came up with in relation to engaging with climate change. And there's a whole range of those. Now, you might say, well, that's a slightly negative message, and it is, but by understanding the barriers, you can start to engage people and look for ways of actually dealing with particular barriers. Some are not just communication. Social expectations are, we were talking about kind of communities and norms, and you don't just build up community norms around sustainability through simply communicating to people. Lack of business action, lack of political action. That's something to do with the political process and how that is rather dysfunctional at the moment around sustainability. So one has to take into account these barriers when both designing communications and looking for ways of overcoming them. Now, the climate porn debate, a number of my colleagues have been arguing that images such as this and statements such as this turn people off thinking about climate change. So it's precisely the point we were talking about earlier. Does fear have an impact or not? And that's all very well, and there's been a little debate in the literature and the press about this, and that should we not actually scare people? Should we be being a bit more measured about it? But I would put it to you, we need at least some level of emotional engagement. It raises the profile of the issue. Of course, it's cheap and easy to design and put into practice that type of communication campaign, as I'm sure many of you will know. Now, the argument would be it may lead to helplessness. But if you start to look at the literature in other domains, such as health protection, you find the following. And it's fairly straightforward, and it actually resonates wonderfully with the age of stupid comment that was just made, that fear appeals do lead to denial if you don't actually follow them up with something else. And what you need generally is perceived sense of personal vulnerability. That's actually quite difficult to get with climate change, so there is still a challenge there. But self-efficacy, so what can we do about it? Social support, so others are helping you to do something about it, and trusted sources. So fear appeals work, but they only work when other contextual things are in place as well. And that's very important. And then a couple of minutes, and I'll just show just a bit of work that we've been doing at Cardiff alongside some of the survey work, some experimental work. We talked about losers and winners, but let's think about it in terms of loss and gain. And there's a large amount of experimental evidence, primarily from something that's emerged as what it's called behavioral economics. And some of you may have read the book on nudge theory, which is rather interesting by Thaler and Sunstein, well worth having a look at. And they talk about a number of these phenomena. But you can present basically the same information as a gain to somebody or as a loss. So if we look here, gain frame, flossing your teeth daily will do these various good things for you. Or if you don't floss your teeth daily, then you're going to get into all sorts of trouble. And we know from lots of studies in the health psychology domain that for risk prevention behaviors, it's actually quite important what type of behavior it is, that there is an advantage to gain framing. In fact, both framings do change people's behavior to some extent in the right direction, but the gain frames have an advantage. So, I mean, that's something for you as communicators. You have to decide whether to present something as a loss or as a gain. So what we've been doing is experimenting with this type of information. With people at Cardiff, a little study which we've just sent out for review, and we gave them a series of passages from the IPCC report, quite long passages actually, so these are just examples. Same information, but framed either as a gain, so by mitigating climate change we can prevent further increases in winter floods, and then a loss frame, without mitigating climate change we will see further increases in winter floods. And in this way. And we also, those who are born and bred in Bristol will be pleased to see we showed a map of Cardiff flooded out. That would, actually this is slightly unrealistic. The yellow is a 10-metre sea level rise, although if we do get dangerous feedbacks in climate change, that is not unlikely, very, very small chance of it. The orange is a 5-metre sea level rise. just coming back to that. So there are some areas that actually are at risk of that. Alongside the pictures to make it relevant to people. And what do we find? Well, just very briefly, this is on a scale, I think, of 1 to 5. On severity, actually, the game framing made the, which is the pale blue here, or the lilac, the game framing made the scenario seem slightly more severe, but on attitudes towards mitigation, the game frame, as we would predict from the health psychology literature, made people much more favorable towards mitigation, which is very interesting. So think about how you present the information when you next design communication campaigns. Okay. So conclusions, we just very briefly, and then I'll stop. And there's lots I could have gone on for hours and hours about this, but there are reports which, if people want to email me, certainly the American Psychological Association have just published a very interesting and detailed report which touches on a number of these things. We've got a better grasp of what people think about climate change, so we need, it's the usual thing, know your audience, but there is evidence there that you can draw on. Barriers to engagement still exist. Understanding them is the first move in defeating them. I would add, there's a distinction in the health literature between upstream and downstream interventions. Upstream are sort of structural or legal or other changes which help people to change, and downstream is the communication you bring in to reinforce that. And actually, often behavior change requires both. You need, so for example, the seatbelt legislation was a legal thing, but it was also a very major communication campaign brought together at the same time to change a very important social norm, i.e. we hated driving with seatbelts versus we hate driving without seatbelts, which is the current situation. This fear issue is important, and we need to get that right. We shouldn't speculate too much about whether fear works or not. We need more studies, but we do know quite a lot from the existing literature. And finally, try to accentuate the positive, which I'm sure Kathy would agree with as well. Thank you very much.